Welcome to the show. IB Nation Sports Talk is up and rolling as we're just 2 days away now. Of course, as we do this show live from the Orange Bowl, Notre Dame and Penn State, along with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. I've been told, I guess Brian's flight to Miami yesterday was canceled, so he was pushed back to today. So he and Trevor are doing a show later tonight. So we're the matinee. Big Show Brian and Trevor a little bit later. Jesse, your status at this time is blank.
Wishing I was in Miami. I could use some sunshine.
We could all use some sunshine, couldn't we? Midwest, living by the Great Lakes. You're by Erie. I'm by Michigan. It's just permacloud right now. That's what it is.
I need some sunshine and not to work and not be sick all at once.
A little vitamin D, yeah. Little sickness. Could be karma.
For what?
Your sickness could be karma. Maybe if you had watched Die Hard with your old man when you were home for Christmas.
That's not a Christmas movie.
Die Hard or Lethal Weapon. Doesn't have to be a Christmas movie. When your dad says, let's watch Die Hard, I feel like somebody should go, okay, let's watch Die Hard. But I don't know.
You're still upset about this, clearly.
I am. Had no one to watch Die Hard with over Christmas. Or Lethal Weapon. And I left them both open. They both got Christmas themes in them. Nobody wanted to watch either one of them. So Tommy's heading out to Phoenix. Man,
that's some good weather.
Going to Phoenix about right now too. That's not a bad one either. Well, of course, Penn State just got back from the Phoenix area where they played in the Fiesta Bowl last week. All right. Well, we're going to do something today. I don't think we've done this. We're going to do the advantage game. We're going to look at some different matchups in this Notre Dame Penn State game and go a little advantage. Jesse's going to bring out the whiteboard somewhere along the way. He's going to leave this as a surprise, apparently, exactly when he's going to work the whiteboard in, what's going to be on the whiteboard. He wouldn't give up any of the whiteboard secrets before the show started. And by the way, punch the like button if you would as we get this thing going. Let's start with this one, though. Notre Dame just beat Georgia, while Penn State, of course, is coming off a win over Boise State. Do you think there's any intangible / emotional, psychological, however you want to look at it, advantage to Penn State in terms of, okay, Notre Dame just beat a traditional national power, while Penn State has maybe more to prove this week? What do you think of it from that aspect?
Yeah, I think that I don't think there's a real advantage for Penn State in this scenario, and I think that I would lean more towards the advantage being in Notre Dame's favor because of, they had to look at who Penn State has had to play so far. They played SMU and Boise State. Notre Dame has played Indiana and Georgia, and you can say, looking at that IU game, what was the best thing that IU had? In my opinion, it was their defensive line. And then when you look at Georgia, what was the best thing that they were going to have? They were going to have also a very good defensive line and linebackers. And so I think Notre Dame, to play those physical opponents that have really good defensive lines, was an advantage for them because it set the tone. They know how physical and how hard they have to play in order to achieve their goals. You can't say the same for Penn State because I just don't think they've had to reach that level of physicality yet. They don't know what that level of physicality necessarily feels like quite yet. And so, in terms of Notre Dame playing a bigger opponent, I think that is lean towards Notre Dame's favor. The only thing that you can't do is say, oh, well, we beat Georgia and maybe think that, Penn State's a lesser opponent.
Right.
And that's the job of Marcus Freeman this week. And that's not something I'm ultimately worried about because Penn State is in the Final Four. So they're technically a better team than Georgia at this point, right? And so I just lean towards Notre Dame. I lean towards Marcus Freeman doing his responsibility of getting this team right. But Notre Dame has leaned their bodies on more physical, bigger bodies than Penn State has, and they've moved them. And so for that reason, I would lean advantage Notre Dame.
Right. I mean, the only disadvantage potentially is Notre Dame has been in more physical matchups than Penn State so far because
they know what that physical football is.
Yeah, because even again, like Notre Dame for the most part had its way with Indiana, but it's not like Indiana's lines quit. Like especially Indiana's defensive line against Notre Dame's offensive line. Like they dialed up. I think the physicality as that game went on, it was still a pretty physical game, even though just from a body standpoint, Georgia was obviously bigger, more athletic, all those different kind of things than Indiana was. And so I agree with what you're saying. Like, I don't think that there's going to be like a mental drop off, for Notre Dame. Like, oh, we beat Georgia, so now we can relax, because I think that they know that they're still going to see a pretty physical, Big Ten, built in the trenches kind of opponent like Penn State this week. So
yeah, and if we know anything about Notre Dame at this point in the season, they, ever since Northern Illinois, they're not taking anyone for granted, no matter if it's Georgia or if it's Virginia or Miami of Ohio or Indiana University. They've been in playoff mode since that Northern Illinois loss. So I think they only know one gear right now. And you know how a lot of people say, like you can't really flip the switch on or off whenever you need. I don't think that's an issue in Notre Dame, because I think their switch has been flipped on for 12 weeks now straight. Basically, this is all they know. This is the only style of football they know how to play.
Stymie says Penn State does have more to prove. That does not equate to a Penn State victory. Michael says you could say Penn State has more pressure. I agree with both of those. Like in terms of, what's at stake for Penn State. I mean, there's a lot on the line for both of these teams. They're both trying to get to a national championship game for the first time. And it's been 2 more years for Penn State since they won a national championship compared to Notre Dame. So like historically, it's, like Penn State, it's been even longer for them, and their head coach has been around longer, obviously. So I think that there is more pressure, for James Franklin and the Penn State program compared to even Notre Dame. They do have 2 more days off compared to Notre Dame, Penn State, because they played on New Year's Eve, and Notre Dame's game, of course, got pushed back a day to January 2nd. Any advantage there for the Nittany Lions?
I would say if we're looking at, advantages here, I would say this is the only advantage that I can comfortably say plays in Penn State's favor, because you have to look at what both teams are dealing with. You can say arguably Notre Dame's best weapon on offense isn't 100%, and Penn State's best weapon on defense isn't 100%. And so when you're talking about getting guys game ready or getting them as close to 100% as possible, what's the best remedy? It's just time off, time away, and recovering as much as possible. And so I do think that those 2 extra days are a benefit in terms of recovery. But at this point in the season, I just think there's so much adrenaline flowing around that's really not going to affect. It's really only going to affect the people who are really, seriously hurt, right? Like guys who are, if you've got nicks, at this point, everyone's got nicks and bruises and
Everybody's
something that's bothering them.
Yeah.
But when you're talking, big time injuries, I mean, Jeremiah Love, he's going to have probably some sort of cleanups done at the end of the season. Abdul Carter, I think his is like a hand related thing.
I thought it was shoulder. I thought it was shoulder is what it was. I don't know.
Shoulder, arm, hand, something like that.
Limb, something on the limb. Yeah, that's right.
The more you have time off just to kind of sit and do nothing. I mean, because look at Carter hasn't practiced all week. And so what that tells me is they're saving him until literally, game time, essentially. Yeah. They're going to go out there and see if he has enough to go game time. And if you got 2 extra days for that, I think that's a clear advantage.
Yeah, I mean, it does at least help for that. Like, I think the only way you get a real advantage, though, is if you have like an extra week off, as opposed to a couple of days, because like you said, everyone's bumped and bruised. They're all playing more games now than they've ever played before against better competition. Like there is a little bit more to the fact that, again, Notre Dame had to play a more physical kind of game to beat Georgia than Penn State did against Boise State. And you've also got 2 fewer days. But at the end of the day, it's like, get out there, slap a little bit more tape on it, take a little bit more, whatever, ease that pain if you can, and you get out there and you go, right? Like if you are physically able to walk and you feel like you're even 80%, I feel like they're all going to get out there because, again, like Abdul Carter, one of their 2 best players, he's also dealing with something. So it helps a little bit. I think because of the fact that Notre Dame did have to play a more physical game, maybe there's a little bit of an advantage for Penn State, but there's obviously, like from a preparation standpoint, there's no extra advantage there for Penn State. It's really just how quickly anybody, these guys their bodies are able to recover and all that kind of good stuff. So I wanted to go through, before we jump into these different matchups, there are 5 national stat categories that tend to be the greatest predictors of a team's ultimate success. Like how high you rank in these categories historically, like it's a good predictor of, are you a true national championship team, caliber team or not. And those categories are run offense, pass efficiency offense, run defense, total defense, and turnover margin. Run offense, Notre Dame ranks 11th in the nation. Penn State is number 18, so they're fairly similar. They're not too far apart. Notre Dame has rushed for about 15 more yards per game than Penn State, 217 compared to 202. Pass efficiency offense, Penn State is number 8. Notre Dame is number 50. I feel like that comes with a bit of an asterisk, because like you can talk about Riley Leonard's pass game and all that kind of stuff. And, again, like if you look at that number 50, he ranks about 15 to 18 points higher since the Northern Illinois game, like Riley Leonard does. And the other aspect of this is Riley Leonard is a dual threat quarterback. So that obviously has zero bearing on pass efficiency. But, it's like, it's why we always kind of have fun with, how much do the stats actually mean? Like Riley Leonard is at least respectable, and this pass efficiency obviously takes no consideration for his dual threat ability, his running aspect.
I think there's a couple points to be made. First, pass efficiency, like you said, beginning of the season, Riley Leonard was hurt, new offensive coordinator, new team. Drew Allar didn't have to go through any of that. Another point you made, it's a dual threat quarterback. So Riley Leonard is going to rely more on his legs in terms of being, a complete quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And then to me, the biggest difference is too, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but Notre Dame doesn't have a stud at wide receiver right now. Penn State has a stud in Tyler Warren, number 44.
Well, he's a tight end, but he's not a wide receiver. So there's,
but
I understand what you're like as a
receiving
receiving target. Yeah, but he's still not a wide receiver.
I get that, but it's like when Notre Dame had Michael Mayer. He covered up a lot of Drew Pine's probably deficiencies and probably increased.
Probably like Drew Pine is like, if he were a pro at this point, he'd be hanging on to his professional career, right? Like is he going to stay in Missouri for another year? But you're exactly right. So what if Drew Pine didn't have Michael Mayer? Yeah.
And what if Drew Allar didn't have, Tyler Warren? They hit a lot of high percentage passes because of they have a body like Tyler Warren. So I think when you take those 3 things into consideration, that to me describes maybe that gap in the passing efficiency. Right. But it's not something I'm overly worried about because Notre Dame's not a pass-led team. They're a run-first team, and they make passes when they have to. And look at that beautiful throw to Bo Collins last week to get the touchdown. Like if Riley Leonard makes those throws, I could give a crap about what his passing efficiency is. He just needs to make the throws in the right situation.
Also notable that Indiana was number 1, Curtis Rourke number 2 in the nation right now, like still ranks number 2 in the nation in pass efficiency. So like, again, like when you look at that, it's like a stat is a stat, but you still like the matchup says a lot about it. And, again, like going back to Leonard's dual threat ability, the top 2 contenders for MVP in the NFL this year are dual threat quarterbacks, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Again, like their pass efficiency numbers are not going to be through the roof, but because of the other aspect that they bring, that it's a big part of, it's a big component in the success that they have and their team success as well. Run defense, Penn State ranks number 8 in the nation, giving up a little more than 100 yards per game. Notre Dame ranks number 34, giving up just under 128. I've brought this up before, though. They had to play 2 service academies, Army and Navy.
Triple option teams where they're running the ball 90% of the time.
Yeah, so if you take out, they're giving up an average of about 128 yards per game on the ground. Navy ran for 222, Army ran for 207. So if you just take those 2 out, Notre Dame moves all the way up to number 22 in the nation, 113 yards a game. So that's only 13 more yards per game than what Penn State gives up just by taking those 2 games out and average, because of, again, like that's going to skew your average quite a bit. It's like you look at the stats and okay, stats can tell a picture, but Penn State didn't play 2 triple option teams this year. They didn't play 1 triple option team this year, and that's going to have a big impact on those numbers.
You also got to look at too, Penn State's average was 100.9 on the ground, but I mean, look at what they did against Ohio State. They gave about 180, $180 on the ground. So,
yeah,
you also have to factor in. I've said this before. I think the Big Ten is very top heavy, and I think you can beat up on a lot of the bottom, 3/4, 2/3 of the conference.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, okay, that's fine, but what are you doing in the high leverage games essentially? And against Ohio State, they almost had 200 rushing yards. And I think Notre Dame's running attack is better than what Ohio State's is. So Notre Dame needs to get close or over 200 yards rushing, I think, to win this game.
Stat number 4, that is one of the 5 statistical predictors of championship success. Total defense. Penn State ranks number 6. Notre Dame ranks number 8. So they're virtually, they're like 7 yards apart in terms of what they give up. So again, like when you look at, okay, Notre Dame gives up a little bit more rushing yards, like look at like the total defense is a top 10 total defense. And then turnover margin, Notre Dame, of course, is elite. They rank number 3 nationally at plus 18, but they're the number 1 FBS team. Well, I guess not, because Memphis and James Madison they're the only 2 teams in front of them. That's what I'm trying to say. And obviously, they're not in the championship picture. Penn State is number 21 in turnover margin. They are plus 10 this season, so they're pretty good as well. They take care of the ball. They turn it over pretty well. So really, like the 2 teams stack up. Like when you look at those 5 different markers, they're fairly similar to each other in a lot of different ways. So let's take a look at some of the specific matchups. I've listed, all these matchups that we're going to look at, Jesse, as we do this advantage game. Is there one matchup in particular where you think Notre Dame has the biggest advantage that maybe you want to start with here?
I think that Notre Dame has the biggest advantage that Notre Dame has, in my opinion, is their secondary and more importantly their safeties, because of the way they can roll into coverage and also roll down and fill run lanes. Xavier Watson and Don Schuler are tremendous. We see Xavier Watson's ability to be a ball hawk with all the interceptions and contended passes that he has, but also he does a tremendous job of filling the alley and setting the edge and forcing things back inside on outside runs, end arounds, jet sweeps, that sort of stuff. And then Don Schuler is very good about, playing down in the box, sniffing out screens, blowing them up, and then also, being a guy who can fill down in the run alley. So I think Notre Dame's safety play, not only in coverage, but also in run, is a huge advantage for Notre Dame.
So you're going Notre Dame's secondary against Penn State's receivers, is what you're saying.
You could say receivers and running backs because, again, of how effective they are in the run game as well.
Right. Let me just say, when I
found this on the web.
Okay, thank you very much, Siri. I love it when she does that. Let me see. Let me do this here real quick. All right. So I'll just say, when I looked, went and watched, rewatched some Penn State from this season. When I look at Penn State on either side of the ball, it really reminds me a lot of Brian Kelly's Notre Dame. Like, I don't know about you, and I'm not saying this as an insult to Brian Kelly or any of the players or anything like that. They're built well in the trenches, although I'm not impressed, that impressed with their offensive line when I look at them. They're a good offensive line. I don't think they're an elite offensive line, but they just lack overall dynamic players, with the exception of, Tyler Warren, the tight end on offense, and Abdul Carter, the edge rusher on defense. They're good, but not game-changing type guys. Drew Allar has more arm talent than, like Ian Book, for example, and he has more classic size, but he, otherwise nothing that he does really scares me. So I just feel like they're built well in the trenches. They're very solid, but I just think that overall they lack, like dynamic, explosive type skill players, especially, and I know, Brian Kelly obviously had some dynamic skill players. He had Will Fuller, like he had Economia St. Brown. He had some guy, in the tight ends, obviously. So I'm not saying that there was never anything there, but I just think, like, in general, watching Penn State, especially as I compare them to Marcus Freeman's Notre Dame, there's just a lot more both physicality and explosiveness from the Notre Dame side compared to the Penn State side. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that Penn State's offense is, I wouldn't use the word methodical, but it's not, it's really similar to Notre Dame's, to be honest with you, right? Like in terms of a lot of, like you said, dominance in the trenches, good running backs, one of the best tight ends in all of college football. Like that was Brian Kelly's calling card, minus having, really good running backs there for a while. So, you asked me the biggest advantage. I wish I could say the entire Notre Dame defense versus Penn State's offense, because I think you can go level by level. Like the linebackers, I think, are an advantage because of how well they're able to blitz and also, play in the run game.
Yeah.
I think their defensive line is an advantage because of how physical they are. They get a lot of.
Are you just going to go through all the matchups now before we get into them? Or what?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I just think the whole defense is an advantage in what Al Golden's doing versus Penn State.
Okay, so Arctic Pokemon disagrees. He says that's not true at all. LMAO. There's a legit ton of explosion. Watch the last 3 games. Penn State has more explosive, if not just as much as Notre Dame. Completely disagree with your whole premise, Arctic, because you say watch the last 3 games. That obviously goes back to Oregon. They did some stuff against Oregon after Oregon built the big lead, So like where was that in the first half against Oregon? They did it against SMU and against Boise State because that's 2 group of 5 teams. So they should be, and I've made this point before. Against those teams, they look much more explosive. But if you go and you watch the Ohio State game as an example, and you watch other chunks of the Oregon game, it's completely lacking. I'm not saying there's no explosiveness, but I said at the end of last week when we did the show, Penn State looked more explosive than they have ever looked against Boise State because it's Boise State. It's a group of 5 team. It's a good group of 5 team, but it's not FBS. It's not upper tier SEC. It's not Notre Dame. It's not, again, it's not upper tier Big Ten, Ohio State. It's not those kind of programs that they were going up against. It's a mirage, basically. They looked more explosive because of who they were going up against. And that's my point.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to look faster when you're going against slower dudes. So
yeah,
and that's really what it's going to be. I mean, that's just the best way to explain it. I mean, you can't deny that Penn State has had the easiest path in the college football playoffs so far. And if they can answer the call against Notre Dame, then they can answer the call against Notre Dame. But they have to prove that to me because of who they've played so far, right? Like you got to play SMU and Boise State. Like this is, to me, it's like going from the minors to the majors, basically, in terms of physicality, in terms of speed. And the things that we talk about that have made Notre Dame so good on defense is this season is their ability to play in space because they have the athleticism and speed, but also bringing the physicality. Notre Dame, and we'll get into this in the whiteboard, Notre Dame is top 10 in the country in terms of missed tackle rate on defense, meaning they don't miss a lot of tackles on defense. Right. Can you guess who was dead
last? That's gonna make it a lot harder for Penn State to be able to excel in that running game because of the way Xavier Watson and Don Schuler, who you were talking about, get downhill. Who's dead last? Is it Penn State?
No, it's Boise State. They had the most missed tackles as a defense in the entire country. So you're going from Boise State, most missed tackles in the entire country, to Notre Dame, fast, physical, top 10 in the country in missed tackles. It's just a different matchup. And you're lying if you're saying that you, as a Penn State fan, think that what you did against Boise State and SMU can translate against Notre Dame, because
that's my point.
It's a completely different team. And it's fine. Like,
again, I'm not saying they've never made explosive plays. I'm talking about when they match up against the best competition. And Arctic was going back and saying, Oregon game, blah, blah, this and that. I think we can all agree that after watching Oregon, in that, Big Ten championship game, and then their next game after that against Ohio State, their defense probably wasn't as good as we thought it was when they were playing themselves a lot of average Big Ten competition during the season, right?
Right. And, in terms of explosive plays, we're talking about a running back room that literally has the most explosive runs in the entire country in Notre Dame. I know that for a fact. So, again, Penn State has every opportunity to show up and prove, what they can and can't do. But based off of what I've seen, I'm telling you that outside of Ohio State, I don't think Penn State has played anyone as good or similar to what Notre Dame is going to present this Thursday.
And JaCoy, Johnson, Colt, no, I'm not looking for explosive plays through the air. And I'm not saying their running backs have never hit plays, okay? But I can actually give you some numbers on this. Let's just go ahead and talk about Notre Dame.
I think he's supporting Notre Dame as a really explosive running team.
I'm not sure which way we're looking. And that's part of my point is, especially if I'm going to compare Singleton and Allen to Love and Price, the explosion there, the acceleration that they have, the speed, the dynamic ability that I'm talking about, Love and Price. Now, of course, Love and Price don't match up, head to head with those guys. Okay, JaCoy, we're on the same page. I thought that he was going the other way. Thank you, sir or ma'am. But Love has a 54% breakaway yardage rate. Price is 60%. And if I look at Singleton, he's got a 43%. Allen has a 27%. And Allen is obviously the bigger back. Singleton, is more the home run threat. But, when I look at in terms of explosiveness, Singleton has 18 carries of 15 plus yards. Allen has 12 carries of 15 plus yards this season. And I actually forgot to write down Love and Price, but they have more than that. It might, my point is the way that Singleton and Allen run, and look, give them their credit because they've each ran for over 1,000 yards this season. So I'm not trying to sneeze at what they're doing, but I feel like because of the stuff that you're talking about, just the way that especially the run support that Watts and Schuler are able to give and the way they come downhill so quickly, Indiana was supposed to be able to run the ball, right? That didn't happen so much. Georgia was supposed to be able to run the ball, right? That didn't happen so much. And like Marcus Freeman talked about it, like when we talked to him Saturday, it's obviously been a long time since, it feels like a year since Saturday. He was saying at that point that they hadn't determined, like specifically what their specific, mode of attack needed to be against Penn State. He was saying against Georgia, they were really focused on shutting down the run. So shut down the run, make Stockton have to pass. They felt like they could have some success, and they had a lot of success. They really shut down the run. Stockton was able to make some plays, could have got a little bit more help from his receivers, obviously, but, had a couple of those drops that we talked about during the week that came into play. And, again, like I feel like the game plan is quite a bit of the same, shut down Penn State's rushing attack, focus on shutting down the run and make Allar have to beat you with his arm and not just make it an option.
Yeah, I think the only way Penn State wins this game is if Tyler Warren just goes absolutely nuts and Notre Dame has no answer for him, to be quite honest with you, because I don't think Penn State presents anything that Notre Dame hasn't seen so far outside of terrific play outside the tight end position. And what they use him for, they use him in Wildcat, they use him in goal line, they use him, he catches the ball, he can even throw the ball. He's Boobie Miles out there, right? But that's the difference to me. Is Tyler Warren going to be effective enough on offense that Notre Dame doesn't have an answer for him? And so I think that's the perfect segue into some whiteboard.
All right. Let me just ask you, what are we going to whiteboard first? What's this going to be?
Penn State's offense versus how Notre Dame's defense will kind of cover them up a little bit.
Okay. So let me ask you though, because we were doing these Penn State running game versus Notre Dame defense. Is this an even advantage? Is this an advantage to one team or the other?
I think it would be pretty neutral, but I'm leaning towards Notre Dame because they haven't gotten gashed on the ground yet this season. And Georgia knew they had to run the ball and be physical, and Notre Dame out-physicaled them and stuffed the run all night.
Yeah, I mean, when you throw out the triple option teams because they have to run, when you throw those out, where teams have had more success this year, like think Louisville, think USC, is where Notre Dame had to focus on trying to take away explosive passing plays, and that left, some opportunities for teams to be able to, chew up a little bit of yards on the ground against Notre Dame. That's where teams have had more success running the ball, is, where the focus had to be on pass, taking away the pass first, explosive passing plays versus, focusing on shutting down the run. So, and that's why I think that's an advantage for Notre Dame. Like, as this season has gone on, the safeties are just Watson, Schuler are both just playing out of their minds right now.
Yeah, and I think the only way Penn State wins this game is if they're able to find some success in the passing game, to be honest with you. They have to open up stuff in the passing game because naturally, that's going to help your running game. But again, like, the only way the ball was moved on Notre Dame this season was the USC tape. And I think there's a lot of stuff. Al Golden said it after the game. And I think if you're Penn State, you're watching that USC film and you're finding stuff that you can do similar to what USC did against the defense.
I think I just figured this whole thing out. Arctic Pokemon is a Penn State troll. That's why we're getting all this, Penn State's great and, the whole thing. So am I wrong on that, Arctic?
Oh, no. Arctic is definitely a Penn State fan.
Yeah. All right. Break out the whiteboard, Jesse.
I think it's there. You let me know.
There it is.
All right. Let me find a couple things real quick, like my notes. And then we can kind of get into this. So, first thing, come on, where did it go? There's where it went. Okay. So, first thing you have to kind of go over is what is Notre Dame's staples on defense? They play a ton of cover one robber. And what cover one robber means is that your DBs are going to be pressed up on the line of scrimmage, and they're going to be playing man to man to man to man, right? And then cover. What robber means is you usually have, the safety covering the middle part of the field, the deep middle part of the field, and you have a linebacker kind of dropping into the hole. This is like definition of cover one robber. Why does Notre Dame play a ton of cover one robber? Because they feel they have DBs and safeties who are good enough to play in man coverage, which they are. And second, Al Golden loves to blitz. I mean, this is one of the most blitz-happy defenses in all of the country. If you go back and watch the Penn State versus Boise State film, what is something that Penn State actually struggled to do against Boise State? It's picking up the blitz. They had a hard time picking up Boise State's blitz. So Notre Dame has a variety of
gave up 4 sacks. Gave up 4 sacks, right? Arctic. 4 sacks they gave up to Boise State, by the way.
4 sacks. And so, the way that Notre Dame blitzes can be summed up into basically 3 different packages. You have just your linebacker plug, meaning literally all the linebacker is going to do is run up and fill the B gap, aka Maris Leofow last season, right? Like we saw a ton of Maris Leofow just plug in the B gap. Another one that they have is called an axe blitz, and that involves the 2 linebackers. And this is the one that gave Boise State the most difficulty. And basically, one linebacker is going to pick the offensive lineman, and then the other linebacker is going to come off of his butt. That's blitz number 2. And then the last blitz that they have, and this is probably the one that they run the most often. It's I don't even know what you would call it, but it would be summed up as 2 penetrators and 1 looper, meaning that if you had the guys here in the box, 2 guys are going to penetrate, right? Get upfield, and 1 guy is going to loop behind, whether that's defensive linemen, linebackers, whatever it might be. Like they do this a variety of ways, right? Like maybe you go 2 penetrators, and this defensive end loops. But that's the basis of what they're doing. Linebacker plug, axe blitz with 2 linebackers, or 2 penetrators and one looper coming off of it, right? I think that's going to be important against Penn State's offense because of what I just talked about. Boise State blitzed a lot. Penn State had troubles picking it up. They gave up 4 sacks. And again, it's what Notre Dame wants to do with playing so much man, and you have to get in the quarterback's face, right? So if I'm Penn State, how do I respond to this? Well, first of all, I think you're going to see a lot of bunch formations, meaning 2 or 3 wide receivers kind of stacked on each other, because the number one way to beat man is to run a ton of rub routes, right? So find a way for basically 1 wide receiver to set a pick, and the other wide receiver to kind of come off of his butt or rub off of his butt, right? So like that's whatever route concept you want to come up with off of rub, you can. Like maybe on this side, this guy is going to work across the face, and the inside guy is going to run like a slot fade. Whatever you can do to create a mesh between those 2 defensive backs who are so pressed up in man, that's a lot of what USC was doing to Notre Dame, is they were running a lot of rub routes. So how do you get Drew Allar involved when a team is playing, cover 1, they're pressed up in man, and they're blitzing a whole lot? Well, the way you do that is, Xavier Watts is back here, so you got to get as far away from Xavier Watts as possible. And so what I think Penn State's going to do is they're going to try to attack you outside of the numbers. So what's that mean? This whole area outside of the numbers. Doesn't matter what side of the field it is, but I think if you're Penn State, you have to attack outside the numbers. And that's what we saw USC do a ton of. And the reason why you do that is because it forces Xavier Watts to cover the most amount of ground. He's got to get all the way outside the numbers, right? So either way, in a cover 1 look, that Xavier Watts is the only deep guy, right? And so how can we stay as far away as possible from Xavier Watts as possible if you're Penn State? You look in these 2 areas outside of the numbers, right? And so for this example, I'm going to say that Tyler Warren is number 44 here. And this is just like a standard, 11 personnel set. You got 2 wide receivers on each side. And so what I would look to do, and again, this is what USC did a lot of too versus Notre Dame in the second half.
Let me just, a lot of that was obviously directed at Christian Gray. Now, Tyler Warren is a bit of a unicorn because of the fact that he is so twitchy as a tight end, but obviously he's 6'6". So like the way that USC attacked Notre Dame was a big wide receiver against, receivers against a smaller Christian Gray. So, one of the questions is, who are you going to match up on Warren? Because the rest of Penn State's receivers are all like in the 6'6" range, so like they don't have that kind of size advantage like Deuce Robinson had, for example, for USC against Notre Dame. That's how they were able to carve out so much of that, was just pure size against smaller corners going with the back shoulder stuff. So, who Notre Dame obviously matches up on Tyler Warren, because he's the only one that really gives them that advantage that you're talking about, to be able to attack like that, other than, just throwing wheels and, like some screens and stuff like that to the running backs, because the running backs I think they've combined for like 56, 57 receptions between the two running backs, so like they'll probably try to attack out there with some of that. But I'm just kind of laying that as a foundation for, for some of what you're talking about when we look at how Penn State might try to do this.
Yeah. And so if basically what this is going to boil down to is, I think Tyler Warren is going to line up in the slot and run a ton of slot fades. And it's going to happen with the outside wide receiver creating some sort of pick or rub. And all Warren is going to do is release out here outside of the numbers and basically try to beat Xavier Watts to the spot, right? And I think because that's the place that you beat Notre Dame. You have to make Xavier Watts try to cover as much ground as possible. You're going to take your big tight end, who, like you said, is pretty twitchy, and you're going to get him out there, and you're basically just going to throw up some jump balls and say, we hope our guy comes down with it. If that sounds reminiscent, that's basically what USC did the entire game against Notre Dame. And so if you're Notre Dame defensively, how do you cover someone like Warren? I think you have to go with a bracket of some sorts, and I think you have to do it with a linebacker, and I think Xavier Watts. I think Xavier Watts is going to know where Tyler Warren is on the field every snap. And what I mean by a bracket is anytime that Warren releases, you got a linebacker playing basically – I don't know why it just did that to me. You got to – what is going on right now? Oop, that's not it. Well, that all just got canned. Just give me 1 second here, and I'll get us back quickly. It took away my marker for some reason in the middle of me marking something up. So let's bring these DBs down here and press man again. You got Xavier Watts, who's going to be playing middle of the field. You got 6 guys in the box. So again, if they're running a rub concept and you know that Warren is trying to make his way, to some sort of slot fade to outside of the numbers, if I'm Notre Dame, I basically have a linebacker underneath that's carrying him, and then you have Xavier Watts kind of covering over the top, right? So this Watts would have this area, linebacker would have this area. So what does that create? It creates a bracket. You got a guy underneath, and you got a guy over top. This is a lot of what Ohio State did against Warren, and it had a lot of success. He was very ineffective against Ohio State in the past.
Only 3 catches for 45, 47 yards against Ohio State. Yeah.
And they did a ton of bracketing. And I think the reason why bracketing would favor Notre Dame is because they have tons of linebackers who are athletic enough to play in space, whether that's Drake Bowen, Jalen Sneed, Osbury. They're going to have to play one guy underneath and Xavier Watts over top, because I guarantee Penn State in the passing game is going to attack outside of the numbers. And the reason they're doing that is because that makes Xavier Watts have to exert or cover the most amount of ground trying to get over here. So what do? You have a linebacker underneath that basically carries him until Xavier Watts can kind of get there. So you're bracketing him. You're making a sandwich. You got a DB over top. You got Allen in the middle. Then you got a linebacker underneath. That has to be, in my opinion, the way that you guard Warren. And what Penn State's going to have to do with Notre Dame playing so much press man is you have to find ways to create space. You do that with rub routes, and you try to get outside the numbers as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's, again, we didn't go through all of these different matchups, but Notre Dame's secondary against Penn State's wide receivers, minus Tyler Warren, that is a huge check mark in Notre Dame's favor. Like they're not fearing what Penn State is, like again, like when you talk about explosive plays downfield, because, again, yeah, okay, they made them against SMU and Boise State. This is a different category. Now, other than Ohio State, this is the best defense that Penn State has seen this year. End of story. That's what it comes down to. And the answer to the question is yes, Arctic Pokemon, he gone. I issued the warning yesterday that if trolls were popping in on the shows, I wasn't even going to, put them in timeout, whatever. Banned for the show. He won't be coming back. So I don't have time for the trolls this week.
No time for the trolls.
I let it slide too far last week. So I'm not here for it.
You're not going to entertain it this week?
That's exactly right. But it's a huge advantage. Again, like the focus of most of the secondary can be on Warren. But again, like I wanted to bring this comment up here because Stephen B says you cover up Warren by pressuring Allar and preventing him from getting clean releases. I mean, that's obviously part of it. And in front of that, shutting down the running game plays a big part in that as well.
Yeah, like I said, I think Penn State wins this game if they can open up the passing game with Warren at tight end. And really that's the only path to victory I see for them. And that's kind of why I started out going over Notre Dame's blitzes and Penn State's kind of struggles to cover or pick up blitzes. That's a huge part of this. If you get pressure on Allar, it doesn't matter if anyone's open because he's not going to be able to get the ball out with guys, in his face. And that's when Notre Dame got its, turnovers against USC late in the game as they finally got some pressure, to go in their face. And so, excuse me one second.
It's like I'm just looking like DK. Is he just like daring me to like ban him from the show or something now at this point? Come on.
I will say though, the thing that's going to be the most challenging, and then I think this is the case for every game this season is, and this is where Marcus Freeman gets so caught up in Notre Dame not playing football versus football, is these linebackers have to be good with their eyes because I think Penn State's going to try to do stuff where maybe they take everything and slide it, to the left. And they try to hit Warren on like a backside route, basically, right? So can we get your eyes to look one direction and you lose accountability or you lose track of someone on the backside?
Well, that's the thing. They're going to get creative because he is their most dynamic offensive player. I mean, like when you look at the stuff that they've done all season, he's run the ball before, he throws the ball a little bit now and then. It's like a more athletic Cam Scattaboo, like when you look at what Scattaboo did, last week against Texas. So yeah, I mean, like for all of our regulars, obviously I know that you guys are just kidding around. We can take it, but they're going to be as creative as they can, don't you think, in finding ways to get Warren the football because he gives them the, again, like it comes down to how many players do you have who can make explosive plays? And I'm not saying Singleton doesn't have a chance to make any explosive plays because if you just forget about him, he obviously can. Like it's Warren first, and then there's a pretty good gap to me, and then it's Singleton in terms of guys who can make But again, like when I watch this Penn State offense and their running backs, like they're good because again they both ran for over 1,000 yards, so that they're pretty good. But like when I look at the speed that Notre Dame has gone against a team like Georgia, and I just don't see that same kind of overall dynamic ability on the Penn State side of the football. Do you?
No, I don't see a ton of dynamic ability to be.
And I don't see it down in the trenches either. Like what Notre Dame, like these are like this Penn State team to me, again, like I was talking about, I would compare them more to, like Brian Kelly's Notre Dame compared to the current Marcus Freeman Notre Dame. Like there are good players there. They're solid up front, but like when you compare the bodies, for example, on Penn State's offensive line compared to the offensive line that Georgia has that Notre Dame faced with, like the length that Vince talked about, the length and the height and the overall athleticism, I feel like this is, like It's a bit more compact type line that it doesn't move their feet nearly as well, I don't think, as Georgia's guys move their feet.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still Georgia and Penn State. Like, who's getting more 5-star, 4-star? Who's got a better blue chip ratio? Like,
right,
all of that stuff. Like, again, Notre Dame has played against the big boys. Penn State hasn't played against the big boys yet in the playoffs.
Right.
So I think that is going to lean in Notre Dame's favor. And I think the other thing you have to worry about too is, if things are really bad and they can't run the ball and their passing game isn't open, I mean, who's to say that Warren doesn't go back there and line up as a Wildcat quarterback as well? Like, that's another aspect. Right. Yeah. That's another part that you kind of have to be, ready for if you're the Notre Dame defense. And to me, you shut down Warren and you suffocate them in the run game. I just don't see them moving the ball all too well. Like, yeah, Drew Allar had a sick pass, but it was against Boise State. I guarantee Xavier Watts or these corners aren't getting burned up like those Boise State defensive backs did.
I completely agree. Like, literally, you're talking about like everyone across the board in Notre Dame's secondary is All-American caliber. You can't say the same for either SMU or Boise State. There's just a huge difference in what Allar and Penn State are going to see in the secondary this week compared to anything they've seen the last couple of weeks. Much closer to Indiana than anything, and I'm like, in terms of what Penn State obviously hasn't seen Indiana, but I'm just saying much closer to Indiana than Georgia or Texas or Ohio State or anyone, either of the other three teams, four teams, either of the other three teams that are still alive in the playoffs right now.
If you're Notre Dame, which linebacker are you most comfortable with in their coverage skills on someone like Warren?
Osbury is the first one that comes to mind for me.
Because of his length?
Because of his length and the fact that he can cover. Sneed, not so much. Like, I worry about Sneed with some of Sneed has more length, obviously, but I'm worried about him.
Sneed is better the more you simplify the game for him.
Right.
Let's just put it like that.
Exactly. I think Bowen can cover. Like, they tried Kaiser against that tight end last week, and you can obviously debate, whether it was a pass interference or all that. I just don't.
When he got smoked.
I just don't think Kaiser against this tight end would be the guy. I think you could trust him, underneath on some of the stuff that you're talking about. Like, if you're bracketing, I think you could trust, Kaiser from probably like 15 yards in, but anything downfield, that's not where I would want Kaiser to have to try to cover.
I would say Kaiser between the hashes, Osbury outside of the hashes.
I can see that. All right. Do you have anything else on the whiteboard, or is that it?
That's really all I had today.
Okay.
Just, again, how I think, Warren is going to be utilized, what Notre Dame has to do. And the thing is, Notre Dame's not deteriorating. They're going to play cover one. They're going to play a lot of, press man, and they're going to blitz a lot. And so to me, it's whether or not Penn State can find the answers. And if you're Penn State, you're constantly watching that USC film and you're trying to find those answers. So that's what I did. I watched a lot of that USC Notre Dame film, and I watched a lot of, Penn State offense and kind of what they try to accomplish too.
Good stuff. All right. I want to do one or two other matchups. You're confident. I think we give slight edge to Notre Dame's defense against Penn State's running game. Again, nice running backs. I just don't feel like, like they compare, to some that we've seen. I think, again, I think Notre Dame's focus is going to be similar to last week, and whether or not you think that these running backs are better than those running backs in the whole thing, stop the run, make the quarterback have to beat him. Allar is, obviously much more experienced right now, overall more talented than Gunnar Stockton. But when Notre Dame focuses on stopping the run first, I think that's, where they've done a really good job. So, what do you think about Al Golden again? Basically it's Al Golden with the pressures against Drew Allar. Like, what do you think of that matchup? Because you do have a little bit more experienced quarterback for Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, you got a guy who's been a true starter since, been a starter since being a true freshman at Penn State, was a big 5-star recruit. The thing is I'm not 100% sold on him yet because of how long he's been playing. In my opinion, the lack of kind of boom in his game at the end of the day, right? He's a big guy, but he's not overly mobile. So I think if you're Notre Dame defensive lineman, once you get to him, you got to make sure just to hug him. Like, I'm afraid of Allar kind of missing tackles or because of how big he is, but I'm not necessarily too concerned about his like overall mobility, right? And so I think if you're some of these Notre Dame defensive linemen, you just got to grab him and hold on and wait for the rest of the party to get there and kind of get, gang tackles on this guy. But, overall, like I said,
I mean, you can't forget about him as a runner, but at the same time, like you're not thinking about his running ability first, because he is 6'5". He is a big guy with a big arm, obviously.
Yeah, but I haven't seen him really, make explosive downfield passes with extreme consistency, regularity. Like, yes, he makes some nice plays here and there, but it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it's super consistent. Like, I don't.
Right.
Let me put it like this:
you can make him make mistakes. Is the bottom line. You can make him make some mistakes.
I don't know what Penn State's true identity is on offense, right? Like, I when I look at them, I don't say this is what they're really good at and this is what we need to be worried about. I think they're pretty good to above average in both running and passing, but I don't think they're elite at either of those categories. And so I think that's the part where Notre Dame is really going to thrive is you shut down one, you make them kind of get into, a lot of situations like Georgia, get them behind the sticks, 2nd and long, 3rd and long, you're bringing pressure, you're bracketing Warren. What is Allar truly going to do to create plays on his own? I call it the Patrick Mahomes effect. What is he going to do when nothing is there? Does he have enough athleticism to get out of the pocket and maybe break a run? Does he have enough to keep a play going and basically uncover a wide receiver by extending a play? I just don't think so. I think everything that Penn State does offensively is just pretty average to above average. And it's a prototypical, you could say that the Penn State is built a lot like Notre Dame, really good defense that they rely on.
But they're not as explosive.
Exactly. They're not as fast and they're not as physical as Notre Dame.
Right.
And so I'm not overly worried about Penn State for that reason. I said it going into IU. I said it going against Georgia. Everyone's asking me how I feel about the Penn State game. If Notre Dame executes, they win the game. I'm most afraid about pre-snap penalties. Notre Dame had 10 penalties against Georgia last week. Luckily, that didn't bite them in the butt. I'm worried about Notre Dame doing stuff, creating their own roadblocks, getting in 1st and 15, defensive pass interferences, maybe a face mask penalty that gives them a free. Like, that's the stuff I'm more worried about, because if Notre Dame goes out there and executes their game plan with their defensive studs, with how fast and physical they are, I just don't see Penn State really moving the ball with a lot of regularity.
So a few different things here that are, popping up in the chat. David says Allar has the reputation of losing his cool when the pocket gets hot. He's got a temper. I agree with that. Like I said, I do think you can rattle this guy and the kind of pressures. If Notre Dame can,
he's a big quarterback that doesn't like to get hit.
Right. If Notre Dame can put them behind the chains, because they do, like DK said, Pokemon said they run for over 200 a game. They do. I mean, they've got 2,000-yard rushers. But, again, I don't want to make it all about, okay, who'd they play, but and the fact that, when they went up against Ohio State, it didn't look very good, did it? And it also didn't look good against USC, did it? Look at their running game against those two teams. It has not gone well for Penn State in those two games. When you look at what Singleton, against Ohio State, Singleton, 10 carries, 31 yards. Is that good? Is that good? Is that bad? What is that? Allen, 12 carries for 27 yards. That's 22 carries for 58 yards for two 1,000-yard rushers combined against Ohio State. Against USC, Allen, 16 carries for 56 yards. Singleton, 10 carries for 26 yards. That's 26 carries for 82 yards. That's not very good, is it?
Yeah,
Notre Dame has a better
up.
defense than Ohio State, and they're every bit as good, or as USC, and they're every bit as good as Ohio State. I think what's going to catch Penn State, it might not catch James Franklin and his coaching staff off guard, because I don't think they're idiots, whether or not they can win big games or not. But as D-Rock says, several Georgia podcasts have mentioned how surprised they were with Notre Dame's speed and physicality, and that is what's going to win this game for Notre Dame. They're going to be faster overall, and they're going to be more physical. Penn State's going to be a physical team. I'm not trying to say they're not going to be physical, but Notre Dame is going to be faster and more physical than Penn State. That's where they're going to win this game.
I mean, if you go back and watch the All-22 film of Notre Dame's defensive line versus Georgia's offensive line, it was constant punch and move. Heinisch, Rubio, Cross. Like, these dudes were moving big Georgia offensive linemen, right? And that's where it comes in. I just don't think they're ready to get punched in the mouth like that, right? Like, it's one thing to say you're prepared, but until Notre Dame comes out and actually punches you in the mouth, it's a different story. And again, Notre Dame has, I think, played one of the most physical teams in the country. We're talking about Georgia, the SEC champ. Penn State has faced a freaking feather compared to Georgia, right? Like, they have not seen any of this physicality, and I think it's going to catch up to them.
Tex ND wants to know if the physicality, the speed to Lando. I mean,
No.
I think the fact that they're still explosive and still this physical late in the season, I would say yes. I mean, there was obviously still some of that, last year on this team, but, it's a combination of the recruiting that Marcus Freeman has done, because, again, like, look at the depth chart and how many young guys have had to be part of this. I mean, Adon Schuler is a redshirt freshman. Like, he was a freshman All-American this year because he barely played, he played under the redshirt minimum last year. So this is still a redshirt freshman, so like, you look at the recruiting, like, look at the secondary, you look at the young linebackers who have come into play. Look at Bryce Young as an example. Like, so a lot of it goes to the recruiting that this staff has done, but the fact that they're able to still be this physical and this fast going into game 15 right now, I do think that you do have to give Lando at least part of the credit for that.
I think it's two things: majority Marcus Freeman, minority Landau. I think for the endurance and the ability to keep going throughout the season, I will attribute to Landau. But I think Marcus Freeman has established a mindset and a culture of how physical and tough we're going to be. So I attribute more to Marcus Freeman for shifting the mindset of, we're a physical team. You can not be the biggest and strongest dudes, but if you go out there and say and act and think like you're the biggest and strongest dude, I think you can overcome a lot. And so I think the way Marcus Freeman gets these guys to play violent and physical is more prominent than what Landau has done, in my opinion.
Well, again, like, you're not going to be playing this well this late in the season if you don't have a good strength program, and you're not able to maintain that over the course of the season. Like, Brian Kelly figured that out. I mean, it took him a while, but, like, his teams, like, when he first got here, would fade in November, and they had to change that, when they went to Bayless. And obviously they had to move on to Bayless because, like, part of the sort of difference in philosophy was Bayless was still more a, lift heavy weights, just be big and strong. Whereas Lando, they're like the dynamic explosiveness and that kind of thing is part of that as well. But, again, like, look at Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love. The fact that, like, if Notre Dame just needed to lean into the run more and purely into that aspect of it, I think they could. The fact that they have Riley Leonard kind of, taking away, some of the burden on those two guys, I think helps. But the fact that those guys haven't had to have a huge load placed upon them the way Allen and Singleton have, as more, a more traditional lineup and run the football Penn State team, I think that plays into the fact that, take Love's knee out of this equation, that plays into the fact that those guys are able to still, be as fresh and dynamic as they are. at this point in the season. And look, give Georgia some credit. They did a better job of limiting those guys last week than anybody else has this year. But again, you've got an X factor because of the fact that you have Riley Leonard in the mix and that he can be a runner of the football too, and he can also make explosive plays as a runner. Which again, like Allar can run sometimes. You can't just forget about him, but he's not gonna bring anywhere close to the same dimension that Leonard's gonna bring as a runner of the football. Anything else, Jesse, before we move on? You hit your whiteboard.
I don't think so. I think the final thing I would say is you watched the Price is Right, right? That's all I can think about is cue the music and come on down, Jadarian Price, because the price is going to be right this Thursday.
So you're leaning into Jadarian this week is what you're telling me.
Yeah.
The Price is Right.
That's all every time he breaks a big run, that's all I can think of is that bum, 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 But
Jesse,
hit the edge. A lot too much inside run against Georgia. They need to press the edge.
I agree.
This week.
I think that they could have run the ball even better against Georgia had they just kept, like when they tried to run outside, they were hitting some of those runs. That's where, Georgia was vulnerable, and they didn't keep trying to press that issue.
I mean, that's Price's MO. Attack the middle, make a cut, and get to the outside.
Yeah. DK says Bryce Young just used an old hockey trick against their backup punter. I'll tell you what, I think Bryce was a little amped up last week, obviously, running into the punter on those first two. And, it's like Georgia people, it's like, do you even realize, the difference between running into the punter and roughing the punter? Because he didn't run into his plant leg. That's why they got the 5-yard penalties. But then he was offsides as well. I think maybe dial the young men back a little bit, but I think he can be a big factor this week as well against, like I said, I just feel like this is a much slower footed Penn State offensive line, big and physical, but slower footed than what they saw from Georgia last week. So I think that a twitchy dude like Bryce Young can potentially go a long way for Notre Dame this Thursday. Are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do it.
All right, let me start with this. Here is Marcus Freeman on one of his running backs. It is a guy named Aeneas Williams.
This is a guy that we identified in camp, had a lot of talent. And I remember when we offered him right after camp. And he had a great senior year. He came here with a lot of ability, but he had to earn trust. Can you get your job done? Can you do exactly what your coach wants you to do? Over and over and over. And all he's done is continue to earn more trust throughout the season. And at first it was more just, hey, trust in the pass game, like can he protect and get his job done? And now you can put him in there at any moment. Run game, pass game, get the ball in his hands, throw the ball to him. He's going to protect. He's a tough guy. And I love it because it just shows that he's put the work in. Because everybody that comes into our program has talent. Like we've identified that. We're not going to bring you into our program if you don't have talent. But the ability to get you to play starts with your ability to play fast, right? And so what Aeneas has done is he's expedited that process through work, through intentional work, not just the work that everybody does in 20 hours. He's putting extra work to expedite the process of playing fast, playing physical, and getting his job done. And so credit to him. I mean, he's done a heck of a job. Coach McCullough's done a great job with him too.
All right, Jesse. So that's Marcus Freeman on Aeneas Williams. He's obviously singing the praises of Aeneas. We've seen more of him as this season has gone along. My question to you, though, is how does your confidence in Notre Dame's running game change if it's less Jeremiah Love? You mentioned Jadarian Price a minute ago. Obviously, Price, is the next in line behind Jeremiah Love. But if there's less Love and more Aeneas Williams in the game against Penn State.
Yeah, I think that ultimately what you're going to see is, heavy predominant Jadarian Price. I think you use Jeremiah Love sparingly or kind of for that knockout home run type hit. And then I think Aeneas Williams is going to be in his standard role, and it might be picked up a little bit depending on, how much you can squeeze out of Jeremiah Love. Earlier in the season, I held my breath every time he came on the field, and they love the guy on third down. He's in on just about every, third down, basically. What I'll say is, depending on what you get out of Jeremiah Love, I think this is a big game for Aeneas Williams to potentially pick up the slack of, what Jeremiah Love can and can't do, right? So I think you're going to use Jeremiah Love situationally. So I think that's naturally going to call for more Aeneas Williams. But when he's on the field, he just got to make sure to get his job done, right? Like, don't play outside of your means. Get your job done. And if you happen to break a big one or, catch a pass out of the backfield and do something with it, then so be it. But don't be looking to go out of your way to make the big play. First, make sure you've done your job. And if the big play happens, it happens. But again, I think it's going to be heavy dose of Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love situationally, and Aeneas Williams in his typical role, and maybe if not more, if depending on what Jeremiah Love can and can't do.
I mean, he'll get the job done. I mean, the guy Williams is still averaging over 6 yards per carry. So like I have complete confidence that he can come in and do the job and and give them, like at the very least be the change of pace type guy for Jadarian Price, but who can also make a play, especially between the tackles and stuff like that. So the biggest difference is obviously Jeremiah Love is the home run hitter of this crew. Like home run hitter goes Jeremiah Love and then Jadarian Price. They can both hit the home runs. And I agree with like what you're saying about Price. Like he could really, like I will not be surprised if we see a huge play out of Price in this game. So like from like the play to play, ability to move the chains, make some plays, I think Aeneas Williams can give you some really good things. It's just that you lose, a huge home run threat if Love is really limited in this game. So, I mean, that's the biggest difference to me. I think that they're still going to have a really good, really effective running game because Price can be the guy and has shown, that he is the guy that can still hit some home runs, but you're going to lose some of that home run factor if it's less Love and more Williams. Who's been Notre Dame's MVP through the first 2 college football playoff games? I'm interested to see what you think about this.
I wish I could say the entire defense.
I mean, I think you can make a case for Al Golden at the very least, right? Like if you were just going, like anyone, regardless of player or coach, the way Al Golden is called the defense man, like I think that you would, he'd be up there toward the top of the list.
I think I would go the 3 guys, if I had to boil it down on defense, would be Drake Bowen, Xavier Watts, and Adon Schuler. And the reason why I say like Drake Bowen has been spectacular in run, he's been spectacular in pass, he's been spectacular on the edges in terms of blowing up a lot of misdirection, screenplays. And then you started looking at Adon Schuler and the way he is in coverage. And really, I thought Adon Schuler was the MVP of the Indiana game because Indiana couldn't run inside. And then when they tried to run outside, they had Mr. Adon Schuler coming down and meeting him, at the line of scrimmage. The guy doesn't miss tackles. He's very physical. And then you bring in Xavier Watts, who's just roaming. He gets the interceptions. He has, he himself had big plays in the run game against Georgia. So I wish I could go the entire defense. But to me, it's got to be either Drake Bowen or Adon Schuler. And I can't pick between the two. So that's where I'm going to stop at.
I think Bowen has been, Bowen has been really good as well. Like just like last week, even though he didn't have the huge tackle numbers, who did? Schuler and Watts. Like I agree. Like those would be my 3. I would put Watts and Schuler slightly ahead of Bowen just because like through 2 games, Schuler and Watts have combined for like 30 tackles, between the 2 of them. And then you throw in the interception that Watts has, you throw in the, the big hit that caused the fumble that Schuler had, like the fact that you've got those 2 thumpers. And, again, this is part of what, like the Warren factor in this matchup is going to kind of test these safeties and, and test Notre Dame overall
I mean,
because
it's going
they
to show
haven't
how
seen a tight
physical
end.
they are.
Yeah, that's right. But at the same time, just the ability that both of those guys have to cover up, and get downhill to the perimeter so well, that has basically completely negated the rushing games of the first two teams that they have seen. And I don't think Penn State has, other than, again, Ohio State, I don't think Penn State's seen anything like that, in a safety tandem that they're going to see this week. And I think that is something that's really going to catch some of their guys off guard.
Yeah, and I guess the part that's like crazy to me about Schuler is he's one of the smallest guys on the field, and with them playing so much cover one, with Watts being the cover guy in the back, Schuler is forced to play down in the box all the time and on the perimeter, and you wouldn't know it because of how he plays like a linebacker, even though he's got the speed and size of a safety. And one small thing, and it's completely random, I noticed this the other day when either someone posted maybe a photo or a video. There's a Notre Dame football account. Do you notice that Don Schuler wears an Apple Watch during the whole game?
I didn't.
Yeah, I don't know.
Interesting.
I've seen guys do it before, and honestly, I just don't know if it's a comfort thing, a style thing. Maybe it's like a heart track. They use it for like their heart tracking or something. I have no.
Usually they wear those catapult things underneath.
Right.
That have all that stuff, so you don't have to worry about an Apple Watch.
But I guess my question to you is like, in every sport I played, like, how would that not be uncomfortable? You know what I mean? I feel like,
well, especially when you're tackling, like you would think it would fall off your wrist at some point.
Right. It would fall. And it's like, I feel like I would just feel it. Right. Or like, and the chance of it breaking. I mean, I guess these guys don't care. They probably could get a new one the next day if they needed, but still, it's like, I don't know. It just feels weird. And I had a teammate who did it in college, and every time I was like, dude, what are you doing? Just take off your stupid Apple Watch.
I hadn't noticed that. I'll have to pay closer attention to the videos, I guess.
Okay, it's something super minute, but I noticed it, and it just got me thinking.
Fill in the blank. If the knock on Penn State head coach James Franklin is that he doesn't win big games, that means blank after his first two playoff wins.
It means he's taking a step in the right direction, but what's the biggest thing we've kind of used as our argument in this show is we weren't overly impressed with SMU and Boise State, and they probably wouldn't be playoff teams in a traditional format, right? And so, yes, you have these playoff wins, and you won more high leverage kind of games, but it's still only a step in the right direction because it was only SMU, who was a group of 5 team last year, and Boise State, who was the group of 5 champion this year. I got to see you play the big boys that are physical and fast, like Ohio State, Michigan, all the teams that beat you year in and year out. Notre Dame hopefully follows that trend, but I just got to see more before I'm ready to say James Franklin has reversed his big game narrative.
Yeah, I don't think that he has won a big game still. I mean, it's nice that he's won a couple of playoff games, but I don't think that you can truly call either one of them big wins. Like he has not beaten anything that amounts to a tradition. He hasn't beaten a Georgia yet. We talked about that off the top of the show. The fact that Notre Dame had to beat Georgia last week and Penn State had to beat Boise State. There's a big difference there.
There's a huge difference. And again, like James Franklin versus Michigan and Ohio State, like how many games has he won against those two schools in his entire tenure?
Right.
I think he's 4-16, but like,
would you feel the same about Notre Dame if they had beaten Indiana and followed that with a win over Boise State?
Yeah, because they haven't played a traditional powerhouse yet.
Right. That's what I mean. Like you feel we all feel differently about Notre Dame right now because it was Georgia.
Because it was Georgia. Oh, 100%.
There's a big difference between Georgia and Boise State, and that's the point. Like James Franklin, again, you won the games. Like you can only play who's in front of you. Great. But he's 4-16 combined against Ohio State and Michigan in his career. And he's only won about 30% of his games against ranked teams. Complete flip for Marcus Freeman in the short time that he's been head coach. What does he do? He wins big games. Like he beats ranked teams. So I feel like, Like if that's the knock on James Franklin, I think we're still going to be talking about that on Friday. I'm not guaranteeing anything right now, but that's what I think is going to happen. Like I said earlier, I see a lot of similarities between Franklin's current Penn State program and the way Brian Kelly's teams were built and coached when Brian Kelly was still at Notre Dame.
You were good enough to win the games you were supposed to.
The games you're supposed
lost
to.
A lot of close games where you maybe were a slight underdog.
Yep, exactly. All right, here's Marcus Freeman on Viper defensive end, junior Tuihalamaka, who, of course, had a sack last week in the win over Georgia.
Yeah, man, it's wild, man. I just wish that you could show everybody in your program what the future is when we start. Junior's a great example that I'm going to talk about now, but it could be utilized for so many guys in our program that, after fall camp, he was the third Viper. And he worked, and I'm sure there was probably people in his ear saying, maybe you want to redshirt and go into the portal. And he just is committed to this place, committed to getting better and working, not worrying about how many plays he's playing. And now you're talking about the biggest games of the year. This dude is making game-changing plays. And so I think I said this after the game, we cannot be obsessed with the role as much as the work you put into the role you're given. Because if you do that, you're going to be a guy like Junior, and in the biggest moments of the year, you've just improved because you put everything into the roles that have been determined for you all season, and now you're making plays in the Sugar Bowl. And I love it, man. I love it for him. I love the example that he sets for our entire program.
All right, so fill in the blank. Notre Dame needs blank from junior Tuihalamaka and R.J. Oben this week.
Notre Dame needs pressures from junior Tuihalamaka and R.J. Oben. And the reason why I say pressures is I don't care about sacks. Yes, those are nice, and strip sacks are obviously even better. But you just need pressures, quarterback hurries, quarterback hits. Get the ball out of Allar's hands and make him uncomfortable. That's their entire job, in my opinion. The sacks are like an added bonus, but if you can hurry up Allar and you can make pocket collapse on him as he's trying to read, blitzes that are coming in his face, you got Xavier Watts roaming in the back. I just think that these guys have to get constant pressures. Again, quarterback hits, quarterback hurries,
right,
all night long. And before we go on, I have to toot my own horn here because if there was anyone that had junior Tuihalamaka, on their big board at the beginning of the season, it was this guy.
It was you.
I know it took a couple injuries.
Took a while for the big play. That's right. Some injuries.
Took a couple injuries, but the man has been consistent and was obviously a difference maker against Georgia. So
he was.
My stock is at an all-time high right now.
Johnny, living in the backfield, not only making the sack, but getting to that fumble, recovering the fumble that led to the touchdown before halftime. And I agree with you. They just need consistent pressures from these guys and wherever it comes. And again, I think Bryce Young is going to be a factor in this game as well because of that twitchiness that he has. Hats off to Tuihalamaka for, like Marcus Freeman was saying, for hanging in there and making the plays that he's made. What were you going to say?
What's funny about Bryce Young is I had some friends in the group chat who were, texting me, who is this 30 guy? When he ran into the punter the first time, and then the second time they ran into him, and they're like, this guy needs to be sent to the locker room and shouldn't come back. And then he had the offside penalty a couple drives later, and they were like,
didn't start off.
They need to kick this guy out of the stadium. But it's like, if they do that, who do they got at defensive end at this point? You're kind of, it is what it is. And I'm sure Marcus Freeman had a long talk with Bryce Young, but still, it's like, I mean, you talk about just the amount of plug and play along this entire defensive line this season is just extremely, extremely impressive. And I think this is why it's so important to build depth all the way through 1 through 3, because this is why you need it for players like Junior, for players like Bryce Young, for guys who might not at the beginning of the season, who you thought were going to be, impact players. they're going to get their shot down the road. You need depth, and especially with injuries, like you need these type of players. So, hats off to a guy like Junior Tuihalamaka for staying engaged the entire season, because I know what that feeling is like when you feel like you're kind of buried on the depth chart. You don't know what you're going to do. You're obviously unhappy, but, I think him moving to Viper was the best situation for him because it combines – he's a little bit undersized, but it utilizes his speed and athleticism coming off the edge. And then you look at who's backfilling at linebacker at Kaiser, Bowen, Osbury, Sneed. There's no way Junior was going to get playing time over those guys.
That's what, like Tommy is saying that they did Junior wrong by moving him to Viper. I think that this was the best shot for him to be, to be able to have a role on this team was making that move because of what you just said. I mean, look at KVA, Osbury, and Bowen alone, and then these, you've got Sneed in there as well, and Kaiser is still here. I just don't think that he would have been able to carve himself out a role had he stayed there at linebacker. I think that moving to where he did was the best path for him. And, again, he's plugged away and he's hung in there and he's made the best of it over the course of this season. And he's a contributor on a team that's in the semifinals and has a really good chance to make it to the championship game this week. Phil, let me go to the next one. Here's Marcus Freeman on Irish nickelback, Jordan Clark.
Man, Jordan is tough. My evaluation of Jordan was the film that I watched. He's a dang good football player, and he's tough because I did hear about the injuries, and he played through a lot of injuries. And a guy willing to play when he doesn't feel 100% speaks volumes about the competitiveness of that individual. Then he gets here in his leadership traits, his the ability to make people in that room better, his athleticism, his coverage skills. He's a guy that had shown at Arizona State to play multiple different positions. And, the way he's improved that room, I think that's probably a bigger impact than anything. He came here to compete for championships and to put himself in a better opportunity to go to the NFL. But I think what he's done for this program far exceeds that. And he's made this program better, and we're dang glad that he's a part of our defense.
Well, you heard from Marcus Freeman there. Fill in the blank, though, Jesse. Jordan Clark has been blank for the Irish this year.
An exceptional added bonus because of a couple things. One, he's a tremendous nickel player when you need to, get into some second and third and long obvious passing situations. But then you start looking at Benjamin Morrison, injury, and then you look at not Minchie, the cornerback who is now transferring or left the team.
Mickey.
Yeah. Mickey. I knew it wasn't Minchie. So when you combine those things at the beginning of the season, you're like, wow, we've added an exceptional nickel guy who'll provide some depth. And that's exactly what he's turned into with these injuries and with Mickey leaving the team, his role has increased, right? And so not only is he a fantastic leader, a tremendous hard worker, he was, again, going to provide a lot of depth in the secondary, but now he's become one of those guys who is, predominantly out there every series. And so it feels like the more you put on his plate, the better he gets. And those are the type of players that you want on defenses. The more we give you, the better you perform.
Yeah, exactly. I think you pretty much hit it on the head. I think that he has generally flown under the radar because of the fact that you've got Xavier Watson and Don Schuler, just playing out of their minds the way they are, because of the fact that, you've also got Leonard Moore, a true freshman, coming in and playing the way he has. But especially like with the Mickey thing, because like right after Mickey, that was the Louisville game, and Jordan Clark had to play a lot of snaps, in that Louisville game. And he's ended up playing a lot of snaps over the course of this season. He played 71 snaps against Louisville and really showed, the versatility that he had, and he's played a lot. And, I think what always impresses me is like all of a sudden, like you see like this short pass or whatever, and then you just see this flash, whether it's like a blue flash when they're wearing their blue uniforms or a white flash when they're wearing their white uniforms, and it's like, boom, and there's just this big hit. It's like, who was that? And he gets up and it's number one, and it's like he has just brought them so much. He flies around, makes quick decisions, comes up with the big hits, lays the wood when he gets the chance, all those different things. What do you think of like this potential, and it kind of surprised me that like he's played the 5th most snaps of anyone on the defense, and it's behind Watts, Schuler, Gray, and Moore as well. Like this particular matchup, like they use so much of Warren. Like, do you think we maybe see less of Jordan Clark against Penn State this week?
I actually think that, we were going over that bracket scheme earlier a bit on the whiteboard.
You think he could be a factor in that?
I think he could, because when you get into some nickel packages on, 3rd and long, you're going to get rid of one of those linebackers. And I guarantee one of the other linebackers is going to be bringing pressure. And so I think you might see a bracket with Clark underneath and Xavier Watts over top in those more passing down situations. But like 1st and 10, I think that's when you'll see a traditional, linebacker and Watts in the bracket coverage. But when they get into nickel packages and it becomes a more obvious passing down, I think Clark's going to be used to bracket Warren quite a bit.
Okay. All right. I think we're all kind of waiting to see. We're interested to see, maybe some more nervous than others, to see exactly, how Notre Dame goes about defending Tyler Warren. I mean, that's obviously, like, of all the passing matchups, that's the biggest one for Penn State is how Notre Dame is at least able to limit that. Can they limit it to the extent of Ohio State with 3 catches for 45 yards? I don't know about that, but I mean, even if it's like 6 for 60 yards, especially if you keep him out of the end zone, I think that's a huge win, don't you?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very similar to Ohio State, because Ohio State's defense is built a lot like Notre Dame's. I think Notre Dame has better linebackers, better speed and physicality at linebacker. But when you look at the secondary, I mean, they play a ton of cover 1 man. They press up in man. And who did they have at safety? Caleb Downs. Who's Notre Dame's Caleb Downs? Xavier Watts. We're talking about 2 of the best safeties in the entire country, right? And so I just see a lot of mirrors between Ohio State and Notre Dame. And I think it's going to replicate, how Penn State performed as well on the field on Thursday.
Notre Dame players, of course, again, wearing their names on the back of their jerseys. They've done it for both games so far. Do you buy or sell always putting names on the jersey for the Fighting Irish?
To me, honestly, I don't care. But in terms of the NIL era, I do think that putting the names on the jerseys makes more sense. And I don't know if you saw it today, but a lot of these guys were posting on Twitter this new ROY thing, basically return on yourself. And it's a new NIL collective where basically fans can go in and basically, donate money to that player. And so what's the best way to know who a player is? If you slap their
name on the jersey.
You slap their last name on the back of the jersey. So I do think with the NIL, I would like to see it a little bit more, because it allows these players to get the maximum amount of exposure. But while we're on the jersey question, this is already a week-to-week thing.
They're wearing white. They're wearing white.
I know, but are you all white? Or are you going gold pants?
Good question. They've gone traditional with each of the first 2 games. Personally, I'd like to see them bust out the green numbers.
I know
on the white. That'd be my call, but I don't get to make the call.
I think they're just going to go traditional.
I haven't seen any media day photos from today. I know that they were doing some media stuff down there in Miami today, but I haven't seen any photos come of that. So, I mean, that'll tell you if they were wearing their jerseys for the media day. That's what it'll end up being. But I completely agree. Like with NIL, I think that's the way to go going forward. I mean, the other teams, the basketball teams, wear names on their back. Why not? Why not let football? I mean, I realize the tradition and it's kind of a reward for the postseason when they put the names on. But I think that with NIL and just kind of like what you just talked about right there, I think that's every reason to just let them put the names on the back. Have you seen the Charles Du, who of course is from Beijing? Have you seen? Yeah. They put the Mandarin on. They let him. They do it in Mandarin. I think that's a pretty cool little touch that they've got for him.
As do I. I think it just creates more exposure for the player, and that's what the whole NIL is about.
Maybe they need to, women's basketball needs to let Kate Koval go Cyrillic, since she's from Ukraine and do a little Cyrillic on the back of hers. I think that'd be a nice little touch as well. Fill in the blank. The Chicago Bears requesting permission to interview Dallas Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy is blank.
Is meh. I don't know why you're bringing up this Cowboys discourse. They're completely
People
out
are actually
of my
inquiring.
mind.
People, inquiring minds want to hear you and I commiserate on the Cowboys, I think, from time to time.
I don't want to get into this. I'm so happy with where Notre Dame is at. I could care less about the Cowboys at this point in my life. Like when you talk about, let's be honest here. In the last 29 years, you talk about two programs, teams, whatever you want to call it, that were kind of mirror of each other, haven't won the big game. Notre Dame just won its biggest game ever, as me being a Notre Dame fan. They actually have kind of finally, flipped the script in some regard. Here's what I'm going to say. The only thing that pisses me off about this whole situation is Jerry Jones is going to wait a maximum amount of time possible and act like people care about Mike McCarthy and all these things. The Bears inquired, and he hasn't even granted them permission to speak to him. And so all that's going to happen is Jerry Jones is going to, all these people like Mike McCarthy, and there's interest in Mike McCarthy. And he's going to wait it out, and he's going to keep Mike McCarthy, and I'm going to have to go through this whole cycle again. And so when you talk about the Cowboys and Jerry Jones, they just do everything
backwards.
Everything is done backwards for no reason. And it's done for a reason, because all Jerry cares about is the publicity that the Cowboys get, not how good of a team they are or how many wins they have or their playoff success or if they can actually win a Super Bowl. He cares that people are clicking and talking about the Cowboys every day. And so what do? You do everything backwards that you're supposed to. So again, I don't care. The Bears aren't going to hire Mike McCarthy, but Jerry Jones is going to drag this thing out, act like Mike McCarthy is this hot commodity, and then sign him. And it's just going to be a miserable cycle all over again.
Yes. And you will be the one watching Dallas Cowboys football.
You will too.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you will.
If Mike McCarthy is still the head coach, I will not be watching.
You will be watching.
I can guarantee you, like maybe by game 8, if they actually play well. I don't need to watch soft football. They're the 10-man team. They need a heart. They don't have a heart, and I don't want to hear Jerry Jones talking about, he overcame and they played better, even with Dak out. Okay, how about the team that just got bludgeoned by New Orleans, and then New Orleans went on to lose 7 games after that? That's when Dak was still healthy. That's the true Dallas Cowboys Mike McCarthy team. I don't need any of that. Mike Vrabel is available. Pete Carroll is available. I'd rather eat a snack with Rex Ryan, for that matter. There are a million guys I would rather have than Mike McCarthy. But you're exactly right. Jerry Jones is going to take this. Well, there's interest in this guy, so how can I let him go now? And that's what it's going to be. And I'm not going to watch it, Jesse. I can guarantee you that. I will not watch it.
We'll see.
Not. The Raiders fired head coach Antonio Pierce today. Do you buy or sell Pierce's Exhibit A, why you shouldn't hire the interim coach as your head coach?
Sell. I mean, the teams are firing Pierce. They're firing the Patriots fired Mayo. Like, what can you actually gain in 1 year? Like, again, Dan Campbell went 4-13 in his first year, and look where he's at now. How can you truly say that giving a coach 1 season is an ample amount of time to establish culture, kind of make a shift in whatever direction they want to see? I just don't think you get tangible results out of 1 year and then firing a guy. I think you are worse off by hitting the restart button only after 1 year. So I think it's more of a reflection of ownership and the organization than it is the head coach.
I would definitely agree with that.
The Raiders have been absolute dog since probably 2002, right? Like they've got 2 playoff appearances, I think, in the last 20 years. I mean, they've just been bad. And so I think it's laughable that these organizations and owners have to find a scapegoat and say, you know what, we're going to fire the coach after 1 year, after they did this whole vetting process and hired the coach themselves. So I think it's completely garbage. And I think coaches deserve more than 1 year to prove themselves.
Even Gerard Mayo, Like, I think Mayo, like, he wasn't an interim, so, like, this is separate from the conversation, but he also got fired after 1 year. Like, he felt like he needed to go. Like, everything about that situation, just like, talking out loud about how the team, doesn't play hard enough, like speaking into cameras and, just all the weird things and weird decisions that he made, and then costing them the number 1 pick by actually winning the other day. Like, that to me is much more inexcusable than anything that Antonio Pierce did. Like, I do feel like you're right. But in general, the Raiders situation, going back to when Al Davis was still alive, and obviously Mark Davis is his son, and he still owns it. Like, those organizations, the dysfunction when you talk about Cowboys, Raiders, it is very similar in those two organizations. And quite frankly, I don't think it's that far behind with the Chicago Bears, like in terms of, you've got this longtime family ownership and the whole thing. So yeah, I don't think the dysfunction is like, I think the dysfunction is fairly similar in all three of those situations, honestly. All right. I think that's going to do it for tonight. Brian and Tyler have a show coming up. Brian getting into Miami. I don't know exactly when it's going to start. I don't know if they know exactly when it's going to start. All I heard was once Brian got situated down in Miami in his hotel, then they would be starting their show. So they've got a show coming up tonight as well. So looking forward to that. Jess, hope you're feeling better soon. I think we're all going to be here on Friday, day after the Orange Bowl. You and me and Vince together for a little bit.
I will be here for Friday, and I'm just hoping I feel better at that point.
What did I say? Did I say Tyler? Yeah, Trevor is obviously what I meant, because no one's ever misspoken, on this show or anywhere else in their life. Right. Brian and Trevor, obviously. Brian and Trevor. All right. A couple quick things, though. Beefeater, great to meet you, too. I don't know if Beefeater is still hanging around. I mentioned Beefeater on the show yesterday. 3 different IB guys. All 2 of them came up to me, and Beefeater was one of them. That's not his real name, by the way. But him, Andre, and Matt, met them out in Chapel Hill. And then David wants to know how your back is doing. He said you never got back to him.
Oh, back is doing great. It just occasionally will feel kind of out of whack, but I think that has to do with the majority of, like, when I'm bouncing around and sleeping on like 4 different beds in a span of 2 weeks is when it feels its worst.
All right. Good news. Jules, thanks for the reminder. Subscribe, like, all that good stuff. And if you're listening on the podcast platform, you might notice that you're not hearing some of the stuff that you used to hear for a long time, because as Brian tweeted about yesterday, we are on a new podcast platform. We are now part of the Believe podcast network. And from everything that I've seen, things have been going very well so far. So we appreciate Believe and glad to be a part of that network now. Jesse, great stuff on the whiteboard. Great stuff, as always. Great input from the chat, especially once we got rid of the Penn State troll. So I think we had a lot better show after that. But we will talk to you tomorrow. One more show for us before Orange Bowl, Notre Dame, Penn State on Thursday. Hit the like button, and we'll talk to you later. Ivy Nation Sports Talk.